Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we cut through the noise to give you the actionable intelligence you need right now. Today, we are strapping in for a really high-stakes look at mastering the modern B2B sales conversation. You know, the world of selling has just fundamentally changed, and we have to face this very specific challenge. Our sources are all confirming it. The average buyer is already 57% of the way through their research journey, maybe even more, before they ever agree to speak to a human.
Before they even pick up the phone.
Exactly. They are informed, they've done the research, they're selective. So if the buyer is already so educated, what is the seller's job now?
Yeah.
It certainly isn't, reciting the company slide deck or giving some basic feature tour.
No, absolutely not. And the margin for error there it's just razor thin. If you're waiting until the last 40% of their journey to try and insert some value, you are already way behind. So the core mission of this deep dive is really to unpack that critical shift in roles. We're moving from that traditional, product-pushing salesperson to the modern seller, the highly valuable, trusted advisor, or an insight provider.
An insight provider.
Yeah. And that shift hinges entirely on your ability to master effective discovery, deploy powerful, insightful questions, practice really disciplined active listening, and then ultimately deliver a truly consultative pitch, one that guides complex decisions rather than trying to force them.
And we're diving into the data, right? The behavioral science, the process frameworks that really separate the top tier from the average. We're going to reveal the traps like talking way too much and lay out the data-backed behaviors that consistently distinguish the highest performers. So if you want a shortcut to being the single most valuable person in that buyer's decision process, well, this is where we start. Okay, let's start with the fundamental mindset. The thing that kills deals before they even really get off the ground. What is the single biggest behavioral mistake we see reps make, even ones with good products and, good intent?
It really boils down to domination over connection.
Domination over connection.
Yeah. They dominate the conversation. They focus inwardly on explaining features using all their company jargon. And they often confuse their own sort of aggressive confidence with genuinely adding value. When sellers try to steer the deal by just pushing their benefits and rushing to a solution, they miss all the critical, nuanced signals the buyer is sending.
And this is that classic features versus outcomes trap that everyone talks about.
But very few execute well.
Exactly. So why does leading with features fail so spectacularly in the modern B2B context, especially when we're talking about really complex, expensive solutions?
Well, it fails because features they're just low context, they're easily copied, and they require the buyer to do all the heavy lifting, all the intellectual work of connecting that feature to their specific, measurable business problem.
Right.
Buyers, especially at the senior level, they care far less about how the product works, the technical specs, and far more about what measurable business impact it's going to deliver. Is it profit? Is it growth? Is it risk mitigation? If you lead with features, you're just telling, you're not selling. The conversion only happens when you transition to a problem-first approach, anchoring your solution to a quantifiable pain point.
I think we need a really concrete example here to ground this. How does a seller practically make that transition from a feature list to a problem-first, outcome-driven discussion?
Okay, let's consider this. You're selling a business intelligence platform. The mistake is selling a reporting dashboard that updates in real time and has, 50 different filters. That's a feature list.
Just a list of things.
Exactly. The outcome, the thing that sells, is the ability to uncover why the pipeline stalled last quarter. What were the leading indicators that caused that issue? And then providing the mechanisms to fix that financial problem before it happens again.
So it's diagnosis and prevention.
It's diagnostic capability and financial prevention. The dashboard is simply the tool that enables it. The modern B2B sale has to start with the measurable problem, or you just risk being completely irrelevant. Features tell, but solutions based on measurable business impact, that's what actually closes the deal. And that brings us to the mindset of the modern insight provider, which we often summarize as consultative selling. The analogy here is, it's simple, but it's really powerful. The seller should act like a great doctor.
A doctor, okay.
A great doctor doesn't just prescribe medication the moment you walk in, right? They listen first, they conduct tests, they diagnose the root cause, and only then do they prescribe a precise treatment plan. The core business objective is always enhancing client profitability, whether that's through improving revenue or drastically reducing costs. That objective, profitability, that's the language the C-suite speaks.
That sounds really empathetic and collaborative, like a true partnership. But then we introduce the challenger model. And a lot of people hear that word challenger and they think it means being argumentative.
Yeah, that's a common misconception.
So how does this more, aggressive, insight-driven approach fit into that consultative framework?
That is such a critical distinction. The challenger model is not aggressive in its tone, but it's aggressive with its insight. It's an evolution, really, a highly effective variant of consultative selling, and it's especially designed for these complex B2B environments with tons of decision makers. Challengers win because they disrupt the prospect's current thinking. They force them out of that comfortable status quo.
And the model is built around three core behaviors, right? It's teaching, tailoring, and taking control.
Exactly. And the teaching component is so critical. Challengers don't just agree with the prospect's stated problem. They use data, unique market benchmarks, and proprietary insights to show the prospect a problem they didn't even realize they had,
Oh, wow.
or a consequence they hadn't grasped yet. They're effectively saying, look, you think your problem is X, but our data shows the root cause is actually Y, and Y is much, much more expensive to ignore.
So you're not just challenging the person, you're challenging the assumption behind their problem. That takes a lot of preparation. But wait, isn't telling a prospect they're fundamentally wrong about their situation just going to shut down the whole conversation?
It could, if you do it wrong.
How do you challenge their thinking without sounding, arrogant or condescending?
That's where the consultative part comes back in. The delivery has to be collaborative and concerned, not confrontational. You present the unique insight, the challenge, as a shared finding, not a personal critique. The goal is to prove their current assumptions wrong and guide them toward a new, superior way of thinking and make them feel smart for realizing this new approach.
I see.
Then they tailor this message to resonate with all the different stakeholders. Finance cares about ROI, IT cares about integration risk, and then they take control of the sales process, assertively navigating the necessary steps and objections. This whole process is what establishes the seller as the expert guide. It differentiates them from literally everyone else.
And I imagine this high level of insight is really the only way to escape that dreaded price conversation.
Absolutely crucial. If you fail to establish this differential value, this unique insight that only you have, the conversation just defaults to price because in the buyer's mind, you're just selling a commodity. And competing on price attracts discount-driven buyers who have, low loyalty and high maintenance needs. Competing on insight and quantified value attracts committed partners, people who are more likely to renew, to expand, to follow your guidance. You have to help them clearly see and quantify that superior value before they even ask about the price. You make the price point feel like an inevitable small consideration relative to the massive return.
This shift in value, from product pusher to insight provider, it all seems to hinge on one single behavioral change: listening. And I think a lot of seasoned reps, they assume they listen well, but the data is pretty brutal here, isn't it, in terms of what actually correlates to closing deals?
Oh, the data is definitive, and frankly, it's humbling. Gone.io research has consistently shown that in successful B2B sales, the discovery phase is paramount, and silence is golden. Top closing B2B reps speak only 43% of the time,
43%.
compared to 65% for average performers. This means the most successful reps are maintaining roughly a 40-60 talk-to-listen ratio, or even better.
43%. That's astounding. The average rep is talking almost 2/3 of the time, while the top performer talks less than half. I mean, that is a massive behavioral gap that has nothing to do with product knowledge and everything to do with just discipline.
It's pure discipline.
So why is listening such a massive competitive advantage in modern sales?
Because listening isn't passive. It's the engine that drives insight. And as we said, insight drives deals. When you dominate the conversation, explaining features or rushing your agenda, you interrupt the flow of critical information. The buyer is giving you these nuanced signals, their goals, the specific internal politics, the process hurdles that you need to build a compelling, tailored business case. When you talk less, you gather more intelligence, and that intelligence allows you to, document those key metrics in your CRM, customize the proposal around the client's own language, and ultimately present a solution that feels like it was designed just for them.
When I first started in this business, I thought the goal was to pitch the fastest and sound the most confident. The data on talk time it really is humbling. If a listener is striving to implement this 43% target, what's the actionable takeaway for their talk time during that core discovery phase?
So for the entire conversation, that 43% rule applies. But during the deep, dedicated discovery phase, the middle of the call, Your goal should be pure information extraction. You should be striving to have the prospect talking 80% of the time.
80%.
80%. And you achieve this by asking these high-value, open-ended questions, and then you just have to be comfortable with silence as they elaborate. Practicing genuine active listening means you acknowledge what you've heard, you paraphrase it back, and then you explore it further with follow-up questions. When you talk less, you not only gather more insight, but the perceived value of your expertise and your solution, it actually increases because you've demonstrated self-discipline and focus.
Okay, so we've got the right mindset consultant, not pusher, and we've committed to that disciplined 43% listening ratio. Now let's get into the mechanics. How do we structure that first critical conversation to make sure we extract the necessary high-value insights?
Well, it all starts long before the phone ever rings. If you haven't done your homework, you have already lost. Modern buyers, they expect relevance. If you ask a question that you could have answered with a 3-minute search on LinkedIn or their company website, you signal disrespect for their time and your credibility just instantly drops below the floor.
So let's detail that. What's the necessary research checklist? What's the bare minimum homework a rep needs to do to avoid looking unprepared and, more importantly, to ensure they can ask those high-value, insight-driven questions?
You need a comprehensive profile. Start with the public-facing stuff. Know the company's size, their org structure, their industry's current macroeconomic trends, who their main competitors are, and any recent public updates like press releases, major hiring announcements, or even 10K filings if they're a public company. You have to identify the buyer's specific role, their reported priorities for the quarter, and challenges unique to that position. The top sellers go even further. They leverage specific insights from past, successful customers in similar segments to frame their opening and their value proposition. Preparation doesn't just build rapport. It demonstrates a real commitment to solving their specific, unique problems.
That distinction relevance over generic rapport is so key. I'm thinking about the difference between asking, how's the weather versus a question that immediately adds intellectual value. Can you give us an example of a tailored, high-relevance question that shows that respect for their time?
Absolutely. Let's take the research we just discussed. Instead of saying, so tell me about your business and what you do, you lead with something like this. I saw your team recently rolled out a new regional support center in Q3, which is a major expansion. How are you currently managing and standardizing customer data across those multiple locations, and has that created any unexpected bottlenecks?
Wow, that's specific.
It shows 3 things. 1, you've done your homework. 2, you understand their recent investment and strategy. And 3, you're immediately connecting your potential solution to an actual high-priority business model challenge that they're actively facing. Relevance, in fact, is the new rapport. So once you're on the call and you've established that relevance, setting a clear structure it's non-negotiable. The goal of the opening is mutual clarity and alignment, which lowers their resistance and prevents those unexpected surprises or conversational tangents later on. You're just setting the ground rules for a professional engagement.
I've seen this debate about the agenda, should you read it out loud? Especially with busy executives who might find it a little tedious. What's the best practice there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Best practice says you should always send a detailed, tailored email agenda beforehand. It signals professionalism and intent.
Right.
On the call, however, you keep the verbal agenda extremely quick and focus entirely on getting an opt-in from the prospect. You don't read the bullet points, you just set the framework for the partnership.
So what's a good framework for that opt-in opening that avoids sounding canned or, robotic?
You start by stating the call's goal is mutual clarity and a mutual investment of time. For example, based on my research into your recent expansion, I've prepared 3 high-value areas I'd like to explore. I'd love to gain clarity on how you're approaching these challenges, spend maybe 5 minutes sharing how we've helped similar companies solve them, and then have a frank discussion about whether or not we felt we could be a good fit. If we aren't, that's okay, but we'll know quickly. Does that sound like a good use of the next 30 minutes?
And you should also ask if there's anything else they want to cover.
Yes. Is there anything else critical you needed to cover? This gives the prospect control, signals professionalism, and crucially, it establishes a clear decision point at the close.
And we have to address executive pitches here. For those high-stakes meetings with a CEO or a CFO, there's the 10-30 rule. How does that efficiency rule apply, and what specifically should stay in those 10 minutes of content?
Right, the 10-30 rule. It states that if you have 30 minutes with a C-suite executive, you prepare only 10 minutes of material. The remaining 20 minutes have to be devoted entirely to discussion, interaction, and their challenging questions.
Why is that?
It's necessary because senior leaders are just operating at a different altitude. They're focused on three things: revenue growth, cost reduction, and risk mitigation. They do not want a long presentation on how your technology works.
So how do you condense a solution down to just 10 minutes? What gets cut?
You cut the technical specs, you cut the company history, and you cut the long list of features. What stays are the quantified outcomes and the risk analysis. Your 10 minutes must immediately communicate the ROI in terms of a guaranteed revenue increase or a demonstrated cost reduction. And the bottom line, the precise outcome you're aiming for. If the CFO is in that room, your first slide should be the financial impact, not a product screenshot. Your pitch has to be an economic justification for their time.
Okay, so once we start the conversation, the goal is to qualify, to figure out if this deal is real or if we should disqualify it and save our precious time. This is where qualification frameworks save the day. What are the essential frameworks our listeners should really master?
Yeah, frameworks bring structure and repeatability to the sales process. The foundation, the most common one, is great for velocity and initial qualification. BANT.
Budget, authority, need, timeline.
Exactly. It gives you a quick snapshot of whether the lead is even viable.
And then there are others that pivot the focus away from just internal budget constraints toward the customer's actual problem.
Right. Then you have CHAMP, which is more customer-centric. It focuses on customer challenges and prioritizes their needs, their urgency, and the overall scope of their pain. It's a subtle but really important philosophical shift. You're aligning your solution with the problem they are currently trying to solve, rather than just checking a box for available budget.
And finally, for those huge, complex enterprise deals where you have multiple stakeholders and compliance issues,
Yeah.
that's where we get to the powerhouse. MED-CC, or its variant MED-CC. Why does this framework require so much complexity?
MEDI-PICC is comprehensive, and it's absolutely essential for enterprise sales. Deals that typically involve 6 to 10 decision makers and a ton of risk. It's a systematic way to ensure every single factor that could kill the deal is addressed early on.
Let's break down the most critical letters that might get overlooked.
Well, you can't really overlook any of them, but let's focus on the tough ones. M is for metrics. This is the quantifiable economic justification. If you can't state the financial return, the risk reduction, or the efficiency gains, you simply don't have a deal.
Yep.
E is for economic buyer. This is the person who controls the purse strings and has the final veto. And they're often very different from the person who actually used the product. D is for decision criteria. What are the buyer's specific technical and commercial requirements? You need to know their scorecard. Then you have P for pain, which we'll cover in more detail later, and C for champion. That's your internal advocate who sells on your behalf when you're not in the room.
And then the last P?
And crucially, the second P paper process or procurement process. This is often the late-stage deal killer.
Why is that last paper process so dangerous, even after you've gotten technical alignment?
Because the legal or procurement process has its own timeline, its own criteria, and its own economic objectives, which are usually focused solely on mitigating risk and reducing cost, not on implementing your solution. If you haven't mapped out the necessary legal reviews, vendor approvals, and security checks early in the process, you risk having your deal completely derailed right at the finish line by bureaucratic friction. MEDI-PICC forces sales teams to gather intelligence on this critical process flow from day one.
That sounds exhausting, but clearly necessary for pipeline integrity. What's the practical application of using these complex frameworks day to day?
They allow sales teams to prioritize resources efficiently. Prospects that score high across BANT or MEDI-PCC criteria get urgency and focused attention. In complex sales, these frameworks ensure that if a deal stalls, you know exactly which element is missing. Is it the champion? Is it the metrics? The decision process. You use them to gather the intelligence needed to move complex deals forward with precision, and you make sure you never waste time on opportunities that are just destined to be no decision.
Okay, so qualification frameworks address the structure of the deal, but powerful questioning is all about uncovering the why and the impact. If we're moving beyond these surface-level issues, how do we structure our questions to uncover that deeper, truly quantifiable pain?
First, we have to solidify our definition of a pain point. A pain point is not a feature that's missing from a competitor's product.
Right.
A pain point is the measurable gap between the prospect's current undesirable situation and their desired outcome. The consultative seller's job is to proactively probe for the underlying causes of this gap and understand the emotional context around it.
We often talk about just general operational pain, but the sources identify these really distinct categories we need to probe for systematically. What are the four main types of pain points, plus that tricky fifth one we should be looking for?
Right. We have to probe for the obvious categories. Financial pain, like direct loss of revenue, cost of excessive manual labor, productivity pain, gross inefficiency, wasted time across teams, process pain, broken workflows, lack of scalability, compliance issues, and support pain, unreliable service, high churn risk. But the most frequently missed category, especially in enterprise sales, is political pain points.
Let's focus on that one. Political pain. What does that specifically involve, and why is it so hard for a seller to even identify?
Political pain refers to the internal organizational hurdles tied to alignment, consensus, and decision-making power. It's often invisible to an external seller, but it is deadly to the deal.
What's an example?
Examples would be, our marketing team loves this tool, but IT won't integrate it. Or, the decision maker is convinced, but the executive sponsor is worried about making waves with our current vendor. This is pain tied to a fear of internal conflict, a lack of buy-in, or failure to manage diverse stakeholder needs. A consultative seller has to map out who those stakeholders are and show how the solution reduces their political risk, ensuring consensus across often competing internal objectives. And this is where we transition from just identifying the problem to actually quantifying the necessary change.
Yeah.
Sales are fundamentally driven by two emotional levers: pain, what they're feeling right now, and the fear of future pain, what will happen if they do nothing. We have to confront the single most powerful restraining force in any decision: the status quo. The buyer's fear of change must be overcome by making the pain of staying the same demonstrably greater than the cost and risk of the disruption your solution will cause.
So how do we use questions to not only identify the pain, but to quantify it in a way that overcomes that inertia, that fear of change?
We have to ask high-value questions that force them to put a specific number on the problem and to vividly visualize the future consequences. You start broad, then you get specific. Start with efficiency. What processes are causing you the most inefficiency right now, and which team is bearing the brunt of that cost? Then you force quantification. If you had to put a number on it, even a rough estimate, what is the annual financial impact of these challenges? Are we talking about losing, say, $10,000 a month due to manual data entry errors, or is it closer to $100,000 in missed contract renewals?
And that leads directly to the crucial risk identification question.
Exactly. We then identify the risk factor. If these challenges remain unresolved for the next 6 months, what is the impact on your Q4 goals? Will this specifically trigger a headcount reduction, or will it put your new product launch at risk?
That question is powerful because it externalizes the cost and risk. But let's go deeper here. Our sources suggest taking this 6 layers deeper. That sounds intense. What does drilling down to the ultimate consequence really mean in practice?
It means moving from the operational issue to the emotional, organizational, or even the personal consequence. So if they say, we have manual data entry errors, you go deeper. And what did that cause? Loss of customer trust. And what does that cause? A high churn rate. And what does that cause? Our VP will miss his retention target.
Oh, okay.
And what does that cause? Well, he will lose his bonus and possibly his job, impacting his family's stability, you see.
Wow.
The analogy is powerful. If a health problem leads to unemployment, what happened to the family? You are forcing the prospect to feel and see what the future could look like if they don't solve it. You're connecting the feature to the organizational outcome and then to the personal risk. If you can't make them relive the pain of their current situation and instill the quantifiable fear of future pain, they will feel no internal need to change. And that's why objections related to cost or timing will just keep surfacing.
The intelligence gathered during discovery is. It's absolutely essential for sales leaders to maintain a healthy pipeline. But our sources warn that far too many confidently forecasted opportunities end up as that dreaded no decision. So to combat this pipeline blindness, there are 3 essential questions sales leaders must ask about every opportunity. These are designed to be brutal pressure tests.
That's right. These questions are designed to test the underlying stability of the deal and, in a sharp reversal of standard practice, to justify why the opportunity shouldn't be removed from the pipeline. They force the seller to prove the deal is real.
Okay, let's detail the first essential question, the one that tests the status quo.
Number 1, why does this prospect have to do anything? This tests if the pain of staying the same is truly demonstrably greater than the cost and risk of change. Unless the status quo is more agonizing than the disruption your solution will cause, the prospect will just stick with the devil they know. They'll postpone.
So you need evidence.
A successful answer requires documented, quantifiable evidence of urgency and the financial impact of the pain points. If the rep cannot articulate the prospect's deep motivation to change, the deal is just a research project for the buyer. It's not real.
And the second question addresses differentiation and vendor risk.
Number 2, why does this prospect have to choose us? This is about proven differentiation against all other options. The seller must prove that your company's proposal addresses the prospect's most important decision criteria in a provably different and superior manner to all other choices.
And that includes not just competitors.
Right. It includes the obvious competitors, but also includes the option of building it internally or simply deciding to wait 6 months.
So we need to know the specific non-negotiable criteria they're grading us on. And we need evidence that we score highest on those criteria.
Precisely. If the salesperson has done their job correctly as an insight provider, they should be able to articulate and provide believable social proof case studies, references, for why the prospect is strongly predisposed to your specific approach, both emotionally and rationally. If you can't answer these first 2 questions with confidence and specific evidence, your deal is built on sand.
We've established that the discipline of listening is the key to gathering insight. But once the prospect is talking, how do top performers use active listening to maintain control, build trust, and neutralize objections before they become deal killers?
We have to reiterate it. Listen, listen, listen. And avoid multitasking at all costs. The common mistake is when a rep is asking a question, they're simultaneously formulating their next talking point in their head.
Right, not actually listening.
Not listening. Good sales reps prepare their open-ended, high-value questions in advance, precisely so that when the prospect speaks, they can genuinely focus on understanding and synthesizing the information, rather than worrying about what they'll say next.
And the ultimate test of listening is ensuring alignment, which builds trust. How do we confirm we understood the prospect's priorities and pain points correctly without just sounding repetitive?
The technique is so simple, but it's massively powerful. After the customer speaks, you immediately repeat back what they said, or you paraphrase their core challenge just to confirm your understanding. For example, okay, so if I understand correctly, the current data management issue isn't just slow, but it's actually contributing to about $5,000 a week in non-compliance fines. Is that accurate?
Oh, I see.
This is crucial for 2 reasons. First, it ensures alignment and allows the prospect to correct any misunderstanding right away. But second, and more importantly, it shows the prospect you were truly listening, which builds immediate trust. When you repeat back their negative problem, you force them to hear the severity of the issue they just described, amplifying the case for change, which they provided themselves.
You're essentially turning their own words back into a compelling, undeniable case for change.
Exactly. You're guiding them toward a self-realized conclusion. It's like the Socratic method. It works because the prospect arrives at the conclusion themselves, which creates intrinsic motivation rather than external defensiveness. You never argue the pain, you just reflect it back to them. Now, when a buyer pushes back, whether it's on price, timing, or complexity, that is a moment of truth. Consultative sellers view objections not as roadblocks, but as signposts.
Opportunities.
Or opportunities, even better. They tell you exactly where the friction lies in their decision process. The skill of reframing is turning that resistance, that objection, into a collaborative, resolvable objective.
How does that reframing process work? Let's take the most classic objection of all time. It's too expensive.
Okay. You never, ever try to answer the price objection directly at first. The first step is to ask plenty of clarifying questions about the problem, first to understand the root of the concern. Is it too expensive relative to the ROI, to their budget constraints, to a competitor? Once you understand the root, you use an I message to state what you heard, ensuring you're aligned. Then you strategically rephrase the objection as a need you can address. So for example, instead of accepting it's too expensive, the astute seller might say, I understand that our investment proposal exceeds the budget you had allocated. So the objective we need to achieve together is finding a way to fit the solution that delivers the required ROI into your budget parameters. Does that sound right?
You're not fixating on the conflict. You're shifting the focus from why something won't work to how it can work.
Precisely. You are asking the person to look at the issue differently, and you're maintaining a collaborative stance. You're setting a mutual goal, solving the problem, not debating the price. But, crucially, never reframe an objection into a need that you cannot genuinely address,
and always be prepared with a solution once you've confirmed that reframed objective.
Reframing is collaborative, but what happens when a prospect is just stuck in a passive, non-committal objection, like now is not a good time or call me back next quarter? You feel a need to challenge them to see the consequence of their inaction. This requires a more aggressive, insight-driven approach, the domain of the challenger.
That's where the high-stakes technique of deframing comes in. The goal is to take the prospect completely out of their current mental frame, which, in the case of not a good time, is a safe, passive place where they don't have to make a decision. Deframing uses assertiveness, coupled with genuine concern, to seed doubt and force a deep reconsideration.
But how do we avoid sounding arrogant when delivering that kind of challenge? I mean, tone is everything here.
Tone is absolutely crucial. You have to deliver it with a genuinely concerned tone, positioning yourself as the subject matter expert who sees a dangerous trend that they are missing. You're not trying to win an argument. You're trying to save them from a costly mistake.
So can you share the specific deframing question that triggers this mental shift?
The question is direct and it's disarming. It's, how can I communicate to you that you might be making a mistake without you getting upset with me?
Wow. That
Huh?
is that is jarring. It completely shifts the power dynamic and forces a pause. What's the psychological effect of that question when it's delivered with that concerned expert tone?
Well, the concerned tone immediately seeds doubt in the prospect's brain. Doubt that you know something they don't, or that they've misjudged the risk of inaction. It just breaks their passive wait-and-see frame. It forces them to pause, to emotionally engage, and to reconsider their objection. You have now gained conversational control because they are running a quick mental inventory of what critical information they might be missing. There's another aggressive, powerful deframing technique. It's the identity frame, where you challenge their professional identity. If they're delaying a critical efficiency upgrade, you might ask, why are you looking at doing this now? Why not push it down the road like a lot of executives who never end up getting promoted because they never solve this core problem? You get them to run away from identifying with those negative passive consequences and instead step up to the role of the proactive leader.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the pain, quantified the impact, reflamed the friction. Now we transition to the consultative pitch and the critical phase of securing commitment. This is where the emotional argument for change is really cemented.
Right. Once that trust is built and the solution is introduced after discovery, this is the time to create powerful emotional impact and validation. You move beyond abstract data points by leveraging social proof and strategic storytelling. Case studies should never be presented as just dry facts. They're narratives that make abstract risks and opportunities concrete through peer experiences.
And how does strategic storytelling create that natural urgency and overcome the buyer's internal fear of change?
Success stories create natural urgency because they provide third-party validation and a peer experience. The prospect is listening to the story of someone just like them. And by using contrast, by contrasting a client who delayed implementation with one who achieved immediate success, you quantify both the opportunity costs of inaction and the magnitude of the wins. It makes the consequence of delay unmistakable.
Can you give us a strong, specific example of that quantified contrast, drawing on the source material?
Yeah, the most effective sales story. Contrast the pain of delay with the joy of quick adoption. You would tell the prospect about a comparable client, maybe a regional bank, that delayed the implementation of a fraud detection system by 6 months, which resulted in a quantifiable loss of $300,000 in recoverable fraud. That's the pain of inaction.
Okay.
Then you immediately contrast that with another client, let's say First National Bank, who went live within 60 days and as a result identified and prevented $2 million in potential fraud within the first quarter. This creates immediate natural urgency. The prospect relates to the suffering organization, but they picture themselves in the successful position. They immediately associate positive, quantified feelings with your solution and negative feelings with the status quo.
Right. And modern urgency should never rely on that manufactured pressure, like the infamous end-of-quarter deadline discount.
No, that just degrades trust. Authentic urgency focuses entirely on educating prospects about the real-world costs of inaction and lost opportunities. The buyer has to discover the urgency themselves through your powerful questioning.
So how does a consultative seller help the prospect realize that authentic urgency?
You ask targeted questions that force them to rank the problem against their strategic high-level goals. You ask, on your list of strategic priorities for this year, where does solving this problem truly rank? And if it ranks low, you need to revisit the costs of inaction and the quantification of pain. Or you can link it to external deadlines.
What upcoming plans or critical events, like a major compliance deadline, a Q1 marketing push, or an annual board review, are predicated on you having this problem solved? This approach shifts the focus away from your timeline and puts it on their business continuity. It empowers them to see the urgency objectively, based on their own internal pressures.
A confident close is simply the logical, natural outcome of comprehensive value alignment. So reps should lead the buyer through the decision process, not push them. What are the key techniques for securing commitment early and often, making that final signature feel inevitable?
The key technique is building closing language into key milestones throughout the entire process. The initial qualification, the discovery review, the solution presentation, the proposal review. You're never waiting until the very end to ask for a commitment. You use soft closes at each stage to ensure you have buy-in before proceeding to the next step. It mitigates risk.
So give us those go-to soft closes that confirm alignment without sounding high pressure.
Okay, so after a productive discussion where you feel alignment has been achieved, you might ask, based on everything we've uncovered, if this aligns with your required metrics, are you comfortable and open to taking the next steps in our evaluation process?
Yeah.
Or, a bit more assertively, based on the quantification of pain you shared and the successful outcomes of First National Bank, it sounds like we're aligned. Would it make sense to move forward with a formal proposal and scope of work? You're just testing the waters, confirming their alignment before you expend significant internal resources.
And finally, we have the 5-minute drill for validating intent at the very end of that discovery call. This seems like the final critical pressure test. What are the 3 steps?
This drill validates their intent before you dedicate your team and build out a complex proposal. It's critical. So step 1, confirm intent, start direct but open. So, what do you think? Based on today's conversation, where do we go from here? If they offer a vague answer or try to punt the decision, you move immediately to step 2. Step 2, pressure test investment. This is crucial because it asks for a commitment of their time, which is often more valuable than money in these early stages. You ask, before we talk next steps, I know this evaluation will require both of us to invest a significant amount of time together, pulling your IT and legal teams in, partnering to build a final business case, etc. So, knowing what you know today and understanding the investment of time required, is it absolutely worth continuing to invest more time together based on the potential ROI you've seen so far?
That's a powerful question.
If they commit their time, they are significantly more bought in than if they just said yes to a demo. And then step 3, suggest next steps. Great sellers suggest not just the next immediate step, but the entire subsequent evaluation process. This gets the prospect bought into the entire process immediately. For example, keeping that time investment in mind, we typically spend an hour diving into the technical solution next week. If that goes well, the step after that is typically getting alignment with your economic buyer, the CFO. How does that overall process align with how you've successfully bought solutions in the past? This keeps the deal train firmly on the tracks and reveals any hidden friction in their decision process. So to summarize the core takeaway of this deep dive, modern sales success hinges entirely on an insight-driven process. That means relentless preparation, doing your homework so that relevance replaces that generic rapport. It means disciplined listening, aiming for that 43% speaking time maximum to gather insights. It means constantly qualifying every opportunity, using frameworks like mid-EP-ICC, testing the urgency, and ultimately guiding the buyer toward a self-realized need for change by quantifying the pain and the cost of inaction.
And the complexity of the B2B buying process is only increasing, right? With more decision makers involved than ever. This reality makes skills like reframing passive objections into resolvable objectives, using challenger-style teaching to provide unique insight, and expertly managing those diverse political stakeholders absolutely essential. You have to focus on mitigating the collective risk for the entire buying group.
Yeah, and the ultimate complexity lies in the buyer's pervasive fear. While the data shows top performers are phenomenal at consultative selling and building consensus, research also reveals that a staggering 40 to 60% of qualified deals are ultimately lost to no decision.
No decision?
Nothing. The prospect chooses the comfort of the status quo over the risk of change.
That raises a critical question for you, the seller. Are you tracking the buyer's actions, their willingness to invest time, to introduce you to the economic buyer, to engage their procurement team, and not just their words? Are you focusing enough on mitigating their deep-seated fear of making a mistake, which can override even the most quantifiable fear of inaction?
That knowledge, the insight into your buyer's deepest anxieties and their internal decision process, that is the key. to closing the gaps that swallow your pipeline.
Go out there, apply these tactics, and start leading the conversation with insight and discipline. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.